Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode of the Forward Thinking Podcast. It's Christy and Charlie here, the founders of CS2, B2B marketing and revenue operations agency. Today we're going to dive into a topic around kind of like a question I think might be a hot topic, but I think now after 2020 has maybe proved its points, but is operations the key to not being left behind? I have a lot of opinions on this. I'm actually talking about this on a webinar for the company Syncery tomorrow, along with a lot of other topics. And I found that this just struck home, I think, for what we've seen in the past year. So for a lot of B2B marketing teams or CMOs, this is a great learning episode for you to really realize how important operations is and how it can really be your competitive advantage. So should we dive right into it?
Yeah. So why is it important?
Yeah. Well, I think to take a step back, I think if we look at last year in 2020, and if you look at the companies that were really able to thrive during a time where there was a lot of layoffs or people were really scratching their heads on what they do now that you couldn't do in-person events. I think a lot of people don't realize how much budget was going into certain activities that were not digital, and maybe people could kind of scrap things together and just do business as usual day in and day out. But when your budget is cut, or when you only are able to rely on digital channels, I think that's when it brought up a lot of operational pain points for companies. And you see now, and it's, we've been, praising and saying why operations is important, why it's a strategic part of the business. And just now, I think it's, really everyone's
hit the mainstream.
It's hit mainstream. Yeah.
Dave Gerhardt's talking about it.
Yeah. And I want to point this out because I think Dave Gerhardt, which, a lot of people follow him, he recently came out and said now he's changed his mind. And if he could have his first hire outside of someone actually creating the strategy for marketing, his first hire would be an operations person. And I 100% agree with him for a few reasons. And so I think the first thing is, if you have a strong operational foundation, especially from the start, I think it's key to talk about. There's never the right time to hire operations. People have asked how many people in marketing should I have before I have a dedicated operations person? Honestly, if you're just doing marketing, you should have an operations person.
Or at least someone on the team who's operationally minded.
Exactly.
Make sure you're not just building it the wrong way, and you're going to create a lot of headaches for yourself in the future.
Totally. 100%. I think that there's some demand marketers or growth marketers out there who really understand operations and can use the systems and tools. And we actually have one of our clients, Bartek Warniecki from Schedulo, on next week, and he's a great example of that. So he'll be a good one to listen to. But
shout out to Bartek.
And so I think the first thing that we saw, and I'm going to use a couple of examples of, last year, the things that came up, the teams that were able to get their shit together, for lack of better words, were the ones who had their operations set up correctly. So the first thing, or first example is if this is, they already knew how to scale online programs. So that was one of the ways that could be agile. It wasn't, oh my gosh, how are we going to be able to do all these online programs? We don't have the system in place to do that. Someone who has a company has a strong operational foundation is already able to do that. And they have systems in place like program templates, or their campaign operations process is really nailed down and seamless. And so when you drive up some of the requests for that, or some of your activities for that, it's not so detrimental to the team. You can't support it. It's not slow, and you have systems already in place to do it.
Yeah. And even getting into the nitty gritty, right? Things like segmentation, audience segmentations, as you start just doing more and more online, activities, then there's becomes even more of a heavy reliance on the email channel to, you know, support those programs.
Yeah.
And then if you then have, you know, all of your teams like relying on that, and you have like crappy data and crappy segmentations, you're just going to be inundating your database with, you know, mixed messages, and the customer experience is going to be so terrible. People are going to unsubscribe, they're not going to respond, and you're going to have, you know, further deliverability issues and just issues down the line. So the companies that had their shit together, that was able to go, okay, we've got that foundation, we're able to just layer on more and more to it without just creating a cluster, you know, that they were already able to thrive still, obviously depending on the industry, and be able to really support the team. And I think we even said, we did a podcast like February of last year in 2020, about, you know, what the marketing ops team can do to help the wider team.
Yeah.
You know, and that's really like to the core of kind of what we're talking about now. Like, operations is there to support the wider team, like get their job done, really drive revenue, drive engagement, create a good customer experience. And if you don't have that operational foundation, and you're being forced to pivot quickly, or being forced to ramp up things quickly or change quickly and be hyper agile, that's the topic of your webinar tomorrow, right? It's just going to that if you have a shaky foundation, you're just going to be putting on too much stress onto that, and it's just going to create an absolute mess. The customer experience is going to be poor, your team's going to be stressed out, you as an ops person you're not going to be able to support all of this. So having that strong foundation is key in any climate, but especially during kind of uncertain times and when you need to pivot. And a lot of the companies we work with, they're startups, they're smaller, you know, companies or mid-market, and they are pivoting a lot and changing and testing things. And so it's a prerequisite for those type of companies to have a strong operational foundation to support that.
Yeah, totally. So then the next thing, and I think another example of where we saw it is, you know, these companies could easily add on tools for supporting their digital events, or now their new digital activities that they're maybe pushing more of their budget toward, or they already had them in place. Like they already had a, you know, digital event platform because they, you know, were able to add that onto their tech stack. But really, anytime you add on new tools, you need the operations, people to support it. And you need a sound operational foundation. Like if you have a lot of errors or integration errors, or, you know, you don't have the data structure or the expertise to actually install those tools, you're not going to be able to do it. And the key thing here too, for like we've talked about before, for tools is, do you have enough people on the operations team? I think for the teams where they maybe weren't, they, you know, they didn't have anyone dedicated to it, or they don't have enough team support, or they weren't partnering with a seasoned like agency or something to actually help them do that, they're really struggling, or they really struggle to even get some of those tools off the ground because it takes time. And so that is just a competitive advantage. If you're able to be quick, you know, move into these new tools, add them on with still maintaining, like you said, a sense of stability, then that's another competitive advantage. You can get your events out quicker than your competitor. You can engage your audience quicker.
Totally. And again, getting down into the details, I think having a good ops foundation is the difference between getting a new events tool, having it seamlessly integrated into the stack, into all of your processes, and, you know, being able to then just like ramp up your programs within that, versus getting an events tool, having it not integrated, doing all like list uploads into your database between them, messing them up, bad data going through, sales being confused. Did this person go to the event or didn't? So like, that's just such a classic example. And the companies that had a good ops team, like you said, the bodies, they had the people to be able to implement it, they had the skills, they were able to, you know, quickly hop in or quickly buy one of these kind of more modern event platforms, integrate it, train the team, get it going. And the ones that didn't, you know, some of them are still trying to figure it out, you know? So it's very important.
Totally. Yeah. So a third example, and this is actually an important one, and I think where a lot of companies felt that pain, because for operations teams out there, a lot of the focus on campaigns, getting campaigns out the door, and it's less focused on analytics, or they haven't put a resource there to really be focused on data and reporting. And so the ones that had a reporting structure in place, really to look at how they can, ones that were looking at the data to see where they should invest more, how could they improve their channels. These were the companies where when their budget was cut, or when they needed to decide, okay, how should we take this, 100, 200K, maybe more than that, were dedicated to events, where should we put that money to still maintain our demand? The ones that had the reports to help guide them on those decisions had a competitive advantage as well.
And don't you think even the ones that even had the reports to be able to prove marketing, not, I know we say you shouldn't always be proving marketing, but they're able to really say, okay, like this is how much, this is the ROI on these programs, they probably were more likely to keep their budget in a time like that.
Yeah, totally. I think if they were able to justify, okay, we still need to maintain this budget because we need to be able to make up for it and put into these channels. Yeah, 100%. Like they can actually have the data to support that. And they've already maybe created some rapport with the revenue team and with their CEO to get, build that trust that they'll actually make those right decisions.
It's not just going into like a black hole and, the marketing dollars just vanish, right? It's actually producing a return on that investment, and they can like prove that, demonstrate that, and show that they can really provide that value.
Yeah. And on the alternative, a lot of companies were now figuring out, oh, okay, we need to invest our money into channels that we maybe haven't done before. And being able to set, measurement, maybe some goals around, okay, we're going to go into these new channels, but this is how we're going to start measuring them. And for a lot of those activities too, that I think people are going to continue to do over time, some of those are measured in different ways. So operations team who are a bit more forward thinking, we're thinking about, okay, how can I not just look at whatever's on this dashboard in Salesforce? What are the other things we can look at? Should we look at our web activity? If we're running a podcast now, or if we're doing more LinkedIn, organic stuff there, like how can we start tracking that a bit more to do some more implied attribution? A more, operational team that's like confident, has their, they're just,
they can tell a story, right? They can find different data sources to be able to build that narrative and explain the story, how things are working, where the business should double down, where it should pull back, where it should improve, where things are really working and what they should, be focusing on. And that's all about interpreting the data, analyzing data, building the narrative. And if you haven't flexed that muscle before, it's hard to turn that on when a pandemic starts.
Right? Yeah. Or if a CMO doesn't feel confident that they'll be able to even show some like activity or results early on for these new channels, they might not even do them. Right. And so having that confidence to do it, I think, is key. And then, okay, so the last one, and you can tell for a theme of this, like for the operational foundation being really sound and being competitive advantage, it's all things that we kind of talk about day in, day out. But I think when pushed to a very uncomfortable state, which is what a lot of marketing teams were pushed to last year, all this shit comes to the surface, right? Like, and the operations team is usually like, if there's a strong operational foundation, that will stay below, it won't just come to the surface. And so, but these are a lot of things that you shouldn't
like
just
the pipes taking the shit out of the house will break.
Yeah.
But if you have the strong foundation, it'll flow right out and you won't deal with that.
Yeah. I just realized
we might need to stop this now.
Yeah, we just said the S word a lot on this podcast. So apologies if you're listening to this with your kids nearby. But yeah, so the last thing is really around email and communication and like that, like customer engagement, because once a lot of people had some of their more traditional campaigns or programs taken away from them, like the really like lazy ones were like, oh, okay, like let's just use email. Let's just keep using email campaigns, nurtures. Our sales outbound team like was just going to email every email. Like so there's so much email going out there. And the problem is some of those companies were maybe not using best practices for that. So they were just, emailing everyone. They don't have a segmentation strategy. They don't even really have like a strategy across the whole revenue team. Like how are we, what touch points are we using? How do the teams
What
overlap?
number podcast was it where you went through how to email people properly? I forget the title now, but it was a few back.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of detail in there. Basically, everything that we talked about on that podcast, some companies just threw that to the wayside and just over emailed for sure.
Yeah. Look for the one that says effective marketing or effective email strategy.
It doesn't piss people off.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that one.
And so, yeah, I think that the ones who did understand how to use email, they could say, okay, email is like a channel of communication. It's not a marketing strategy on its own, and then they can communicate that back to the demand gen team. So they don't just, they think, okay, yes, this is a communication channel, not a campaign. So we need to think about that when we're building out our campaigns for the quarter. We can't be so reliant on email because they can only go so far, right? You do need those other activities, or if you want your email to really perform well, still maintain that momentum with your marketing and invest in bringing people inbound, and then having a lot of coordination from an outbound perspective with your sales team. So you're not pissing off your prospects and customers. So yeah, the ones who do that. And I think people even were complaining on LinkedIn, like those first months of COVID, like I've gotten so many emails from companies I didn't even realize I was signed up for. And that was a clear example of like that oh shit thing moment happened for those marketing teams. They didn't use best practices and maybe they didn't have the systems in place like they normally do. And
one thing I feel like with operations people that separates kind of the ticket takers and then the strategic partners from each other is being able to kind of look at all of the marketing programs, look at things like, oh, we're over emailing this audience segment, and then give that feedback back to the team, because the operations team is often kind of like the air traffic control almost, where you're seeing everything and you're able to then help the business make decisions. And that's like through data, through what kind of programs are working, not working, like the volume of programs, and you understand your database the best, you should at least. And therefore you should be providing that feedback back to the team and saying, look, okay, we've just been hammering, CMOs in, whatever industry, like, because we just somehow all of the programs from all of the teams have been focusing on that. We need to create a few more, communication limits here, or like really space out these programs or target other segments or whatever. And that's not only down to like the demand gen team to figure out, your field marketing team, your CMO, like they're all kind of working on their plans. And sometimes, a lot of this stuff is kind of worked in a silo, but you're the person who's really seeing it tactically happen day to day. So be that person to provide that feedback and be the strategic consultant internally for your company. And again, this comes back to the teams that have like invested in operations, that take them seriously, that see them as a strategic partner. They're going to get that feedback from their operations team, and it's going to make their marketing better. The ones that just see them as, someone that I just hand a ticket to and they just execute and they don't think, like more of a robot, all of these mistakes are just going to carry on because the operations team isn't empowered to help the business be better.
Totally. Yeah. I 100% agree with that. And I think, to sum this up, I think, it's all these examples just prove how important it is to have a strong operational foundation, and for companies to invest in those teams, and for the talent, either bringing them in-house or also champion with outside agencies to help them. But the other part is for operations teams, fight for that. This is all ammo that you can bring to the table and say, hey, we need to invest more in our team, and these are the reasons why, and this can be a competitive advantage for our company. And I think since last year, we've realized a lot of those lessons, like I brought up, but it's going to continue to be this way. I saw John Miller's from Demand Based share a report yesterday from ClickZ, and it was the top thing around CMOs, like what the new kind of role of the CMO, and a lot of that is based around technology, because a lot of our ways that we're engaging with our customers and prospects is online, and that's a big focus, and you can't support technology and this online without a strong operational foundation and team. So you have, right now is the moment to fight for that if you are on a team there. So yeah, hopefully that was useful for you guys. If you like this episode, please share it with your colleagues and friends, and we'll see you on the next episode of Forward Thinking. Have a good one.
See ya.